The men were drunk when they brought her. The sky over the ranch had turned the color of hot iron, and the air was thick with dust and laughter. They came in from the south road, hollering, slapping reins, their horses lathered with sweat. Sam Dillard stood at the gate, half drunk himself from the 4th of July whiskey, and watched them ride in like the fools they were. They threw her down in front of the corral, bound at the wrists, her hair wild, her face streaked with dirt and blood. "A gift for you, Sam," one of them said, grinning. The laughter that followed was sharp as barbed wire. They called it a joke, a bit of fun, a way to break the silence of the range. She didn't move. The woman just stared at the dust curling around her knees, breathing through her nose like a wounded mare. Sam's hand tightened on the fence post. The men waited for him to say something, but he only spat into the dirt. He didn't like jokes made of people, especially not of women who had been dragged through hell for someone's amusement. When the men left, still laughing, she remained where they'd dropped her, back straight, eyes fixed on the horizon. Sam knelt beside her and cut the cords from her wrists. The raw marks on her skin looked deep, like old roots under bark. He held out a canteen of water, but she didn't drink until he turned away. He noticed the way she glanced at him, sharp, measuring, a creature deciding whether to fight or flee. She didn't thank him, not with words or even a nod. Her silence was a wall as solid as any canyon rock. That night, he gave her a blanket and a lantern and led her to the empty tack shed near the barn. "You can stay there," he said, his voice low, uncertain. "No one'll bother you." She stood in the doorway, the lamplight making her eyes gleam. "They already have," she said, her voice calm but heavy with something older than anger. He had no answer. When he left her, she was standing there still, hands at her sides, staring into the flame as though it might tell her what to do next. In the days that followed, she worked, without being asked. At dawn, she was already outside, hauling water, mending fence, moving with the quiet precision of someone who had lived hard and long enough to know that stillness invites danger. The ranch hands whispered about her, but they didn't get close. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, steady, unbroken, or maybe it was the way Sam started watching her, careful but protective, like a man guarding something he didn't own but understood was precious. Her name, he learned, was Tosa. She spoke little English, and what she said came slow, each word measured. He didn't ask about her people, or how she'd been taken. He'd seen enough of the frontier to know those stories always ended in blood. Sometimes in the evenings, when the wind moved through the cottonwoods, she hummed songs in her own tongue, low, haunting notes that made the air feel like memory. Sam would sit nearby, rolling tobacco, pretending not to listen, though every note carved itself into his chest. Little by little, they began to share the work and, more quietly, the silence. When a fence post gave out, they fixed it together. When the well rope frayed, she spliced it better than any man he knew. One morning, she found his coffee pot already boiling and poured him the first cup without a word. He said thank you, and she nodded once, almost a smile. It was a fragile kind of peace, the sort that trembles when the wind rises. But it was theirs, and for a time it held. Then came the night the riders returned. Sam heard them before he saw them, the drunk laughter, the jingle of spurs, the sound of something cruel on the wind. He stepped out of the bunkhouse, rifle in hand, as the men from before rode up under the moonlight. "We come to check on your little bride," one of them called, slurring. "See if she's still got that Apache fire." Sam's jaw locked. "She's not your joke anymore," he said. The laughter that followed was thinner this time, unsure. Then the door of the barn opened behind him. Tosa stepped into the yard, holding a knife that glinted pale in the moonlight. Her face was calm, unreadable, her shoulders squared. The men went still. "Go," she said, her voice steady and clear enough that even the horses seemed to listen. For a moment no one moved, and then one man twitched his hand toward his gun. Sam raised his rifle first. The crack of the shot echoed against the hills, sharp and final. The others turned their mounts and fled, swallowed by the desert night. Only dust and silence remained. When the echoes died, Tosa knelt beside the fallen man, touched his throat, and looked up at Sam. "You did what was necessary," she said simply. Sam stared at her, the weight of what they had done settling heavy between them. He nodded once, slowly. They both knew what would follow. The law, the questions, the blame. But in that dark yard under the thin stars, there was no fear in her eyes. Only resolve, fierce and clean. For the first time he understood. She was no one's gift, no one's joke. She was her own. The morning after the gunshot, the world was too quiet. The air smelled of gunpowder and mesquite smoke, and the horizon trembled under the heat. Sam sat by the corral, his rifle across his knees, watching the buzzards circle high above the ridge. Tossie moved in silence, cleaning the blood from the ground with a pail of water and sand. She didn't look at him, and he didn't speak. There were no words left between them that could matter now. They both knew the law would come. Someone would talk, and the desert would give them up. By noon, the heat was blistering, and the ranch had the stillness of a graveyard. Sam saddled 2 horses, his motions slow and deliberate. He packed food, water, ammunition, enough for a week if they rode light. Tossie came from the barn carrying a bundle wrapped in canvas. She had gathered tools, a flint, dried meat, a coil of rawhide rope. They didn't need to plan. Each knew the other understood. They would leave before sundown, ride east toward the river, and vanish into the country where no one came willingly. When the shadows stretched long across the ground, Tossie went to the well and filled the last water skins. Her hands moved like a ritual, calm and precise. Sam watched her, wondering what she was thinking, if she regretted staying, if she still thought him worth trusting. She caught his gaze once, her expression unreadable. "They will come back," she said finally. Her voice was low but steady, and others with them. Sam nodded, adjusting the cinch on his horse. "Then we do what's necessary," he said. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened briefly. They left the ranch under a sky burning with stars. Behind them, the wind whispered through the empty corrals, lifting dust like ghosts. Sam didn't look back until they reached the ridge. Down below, the ranch was a dark shape against the sand. He struck a match, tossed it into the lantern oil by the fence line, and watched as flames caught. The fire spread quick and hungry, devouring wood and hay until the night glowed orange. "No going back now," he said quietly. Tossie's face was lit by the blaze, her features carved in light and shadow. They rode through the desert for days, following dry washes and game trails that only she seemed to know. Tossie led most of the way, reading the land like a map only she could see. Sam followed, keeping watch behind them, his rifle always near. They spoke little, saving breath and words alike. The silence between them was not cold but necessary, a pact of survival. At night, they built small fires hidden in the rocks, shared what little food they had, and lay awake listening to the coyotes sing to the stars. On the 4th day, they reached the river. It wasn't much, a thin line of water winding through willows, but it was enough. They camped there, drank deep, and let the horses rest. Sam washed the grit from his face and looked at Tossie across the fire. "You could leave now," he said quietly. "Cross south, find your people again." She stirred the ashes with a stick. "My people are gone," she said, "and yours." He thought about that for a long time, about the ranch, the land, the graves that marked his years. "Gone too," he said finally. For the first time she smiled. Not wide, not easy, but real. "Then we are the same," she said. The wind moved through the willows, carrying the scent of water and smoke. Sam felt something ease in his chest, something that had been clenched for years. They were both exiles, both broken from their worlds. There was no law for people like them, no home to return to, only the land, the fire, and the space between their breaths. That night, as the stars turned above them, he realized he was no longer waiting for forgiveness. The next morning, they heard riders far off, tiny figures moving across the flats, sunlight flashing on their rifles. Sam and Tossie watched from the trees, silent. He counted 5 men, maybe 6, following their tracks. "We'll never outrun them," he said. She looked at the river, then at the narrow canyon beyond. "We don't run," she said. "We go where they cannot follow." And she led him into the canyon, its walls rising like red fire around them. The path twisted, climbed, and vanished into stone. Behind them, the sound of hooves faded like rain. By sunset, they reached a hidden basin high in the rocks, where water dripped from a spring and grass grew thin but green. It felt like another world, quiet, enclosed, untouched by men. Sam unsaddled the horses and built a small fire. Tassa sat beside him, her hands folded around a tin cup. "We can stay here for a while," he said. She nodded, looking out over the canyon. "For a while," she repeated. Then she turned to him, her gaze steady. "We're alone. Let's do what's necessary." Her voice carried no fear, only truth. He reached across the fire, his rough hand closing over hers. It was not a gesture of ownership nor pity, but of something older, two souls acknowledging the same wound. Outside, the wind rose through the rocks, whistling like the ghosts of every life they'd left behind. He squeezed her hand once, firmly. "Then we'll begin again," he said, and for the first time in years, Sam Dillard felt something close to peace. The desert had taken everything from them, but in that quiet canyon, it had given something back, something neither of them would ever name.